Our next speaker is Tim Ross, who you've already seen today, but Tim's got a long history, if you like, and experience in the grain supply chain. So what we're going to talk about in the next section is about what we've called extending the supply chain. But we've touched on this idea of storage assets, and I mentioned the amount of on-farm storage and the fragmentation, not just on-farm, but across the chain. So Tim's going to talk about a business case at looking at grain storage, asset and operation standards. So thanks, Tim.
And thanks for that introduction, and obviously also the opportunity to present to the delegates today. So my objective today is to explain the concept of storage, asset and operation standards. I'll do that at a relatively high level, and also talk about the frameworks for storage standards, why we need them, what's driving the push to do this, and the benefits associated with it. Key thing also, just before I come off this slide, really is to just notice that from a storage perspective, what we're looking at is the asset, so the actual storage itself, to have standards around that. One of the critical things there, obviously, is to ensure that storage is, if they claim to be gas tight, they are gas tight, and also then the operation standards. So how does the storage perform? How does the storage operator perform? So the first slide, Pat's already shown this slide, and he's discussed the complexity in the market and how the market's moving quite quickly. We're certainly seeing a large change in consumer expectations. The market's starting to push for sustainability, traceability, and obviously there's a large focus on health in the food supply chain, which grain's obviously part of. And the other thing is the supply chain cost pressures. Our competitors in the market, the other exporting countries, certainly improving from a supply chain perspective. And obviously, what we need to do is to ensure that our supply chain is efficient and can compete globally. So I guess the question is, as the market changes, do we have the supply chain capability to respond to the market needs? And if you think of the Australian supply chain, it's really it's a two-speed type of supply chain. We've got the old, well, I shouldn't say old, but the previous model that was all the way across Australia, which is the consolidated model, where you have a bulk handler and a couple of dominant marketers that effectively manage and do a lot of strategic planning in the supply chain. Those types of supply chains are supportive in investment and are export dominant. So the key question is how the two different models deal with the increasing demand from the customer. And obviously the consolidated supply chain is probably better placed than the fragmented supply chain. So we'll just explore that a little bit more. So with the fragmented supply chain, obviously the key thing with it is that we have multiple storage operators, both commercial and farm, that are part of the supply chain. We obviously still have commercial bulk handlers, but they, fair to say, they're playing a diminishing role as stewards within the grain supply chain. And we should all thank the current and the prior bulk handlers for the work they've done to bring the industry to the point where it is at the moment. We obviously also have large-scale traders who are coming in, putting up strategic assets. We have the regional-based storage, independent storage, container packers, grower cooperatives, which are increasing, and domestic food and feed consumers are also storage of grain, and we have farm storage. And all these storages at the moment, they're operating to a very much an outcomes-driven system. Jared's explained that fairly well. We have export certification inspection at the endpoints. Standards are done on sale, and both sale from the supplier, the farmer, through to a trader, and from a trader to his customer. And that's supported through contractual obligations. But the key message really is that with the change in the supply chain, we're obviously bringing in complexity. We've gone from previously, when we had the state systems running, 5 bulk handlers to multiples into the thousands. And as a result, industry must adapt and ensure that the QA processes that were inherent with the consolidated model do work and work well and perform as well, if not better, in a fragmented supply chain. And important thing to note also is the evolution of the supply chain is not just from an up-country perspective, it's also occurring at ports. There's a number of new ship loading assets that have been introduced over the last 15 years. It started with the Melbourne Port Terminal being introduced. We've now got new terminal operators in Albany, Newcastle, Port Kembla, Brisbane, Lucky Bay in South Australia, and Port Pirie. And now we also have a number of multiple background noise occurring. Now have a number of multiple mobile loaders as well. And so obviously government and industry must adapt to ensure that these processes that we've had in the past work well across all the new systems. So the drivers for needing to modernise the supply chain are clear. Customers are being more particular and pedantic, and obviously the BHC industry stewardship is diminishing. And rather than consolidating, our supply chain is fragmenting, which is completely opposite to how modern supply chains work. They all tend to be consolidating into distribution centres and large warehousing models, whereas ours is going to the opposite, and we're going to back to storing at individual suppliers. So to allow industry to improve, what we're suggesting is that we need to be able to integrate the multitude of storage operators into a more quality assured system. Is we need to start with the basics, and that's setting up some standards. And these standards are to look at assets and also the operational standards. The idea of standards is they provide a guidance, they provide a base level requirement for people to perform to. And they will provide confidence to buyers, and they'll support we're hoping they'll support the export certification process, and they support other parties in the supply chain, including the finance industry, which Adam Rowe will talk to us about shortly. The other thing is what standards do is they provide a means to provide information and training to supply chain participants to make sure that our supply chain participants and those that operate storages do have the skills and the knowledge to operate in the evolving market. So what are standards? Really, standards set a level of acceptable procedure and behaviour. They also provide guidance and information on what is required to be acceptable as a supplier of a storage network or just a farm storage within the supply chain. And what are the benefits that come with standards? If we think there are numerous benefits that come through, obviously there'll be improved capability, there'll be improved confidence within the supply chain, which is critically important, and also it can support innovation. Mobile port loaders, such as you saw in the past slide, it's an innovative way to tap into the farm and private storage network within the supply chain. So standards can support innovation within the supply chain. They obviously improve the interface with other supply chain parties, such as the logistic network. It means that grain moving from one storage to another, other parties can be a great deal more confident that grain will meet standards. And obviously from a supplier and a buyer perspective, it also improves their interface. It also sets up and has requirements around records, and that supports our quality assurance and will support niche marketing as well. As I mentioned earlier, it's also supportive delivery of financial market services, both from a banking perspective and also from an insurance perspective. It also will ensure and make sure that people are compliant with WHS and other regulatory requirements. It will support, as you're aware, the industry has a self-regulatory framework. By setting standards, that means that industry setting standards means that it's something that government doesn't have to step in and do. And while we're talking about governments, certainly having storage standards and from both an asset and operational perspective does give government the confidence and and as David has spoken about, that we can perhaps take certification, extend that up through the supply chain, and in some way potentially even remove the authorised officers, so that storage companies can do the phytosanitary process entirely on their own. What are we setting up as far as the structure and framework? The vision, and there's still a lot more work to be done in this space and a lot more engaging with industry. The vision is to ensure that we set up a voluntary system so that companies can rate their assets and their operational capability across all the different categories that will be within the standards. So we'll set the standards up, and that means then that these companies can take the standards, assess themselves against those standards, and give themselves a rating, which they, if they wish to, can take to the market and say, this is our company's capability. And why is it voluntary? Well, we believe the market will pull the, if this is a successful program, the market will eventually see this as just having a ticket to the game. If you want to be part of the export supply chain, if you want to deliver directly to a vessel, for example, or if you're looking to extend your business into being a container exporter, it just means that you have standards to apply, you pick the skills up as you apply those standards, and it means that government can look at you and understand that you've gone through that process, as also buyers can do as well. So in conclusion, the market's evolving and it's certainly demanding more of Australian supply chain, and costs obviously are increasing and going up. So we need innovation to make sure that we remain competitive. Farm storage, small storages, mobile bulk loaders are now an integral part of our supply chain. And as a result, government and industry together need to extend our quality assurance framework that we've had for the consolidated supply chains. We need to align that to the evolving supply chain. And obviously, a critical step with that is the introduction of standards for storages. And that way we'll ensure that our QA processes that have worked well in a consolidated model will perform better in the future in the fragmented supply chain. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim. There you go, sort of running through there. And I think one of the important things around these storage standards that we have been talking about is this voluntary framework. And the importance of that is, as an industry, we try and manage our own affairs as best we can. And setting this up this way, I think will give us the opportunity to maintain the ability to control our own destiny to some extent. Our next speaker is Adam Rowe from CBA Bank. Adam is Head of Commodities and Finance there. One of the opportunities that we see around getting, and Adam will expand on this, one of the opportunities we see of getting some more standards around grain storages is the financial side of things. So I'll hand over to Adam and let him run through a short presentation. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks very much, Pat. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'll share my screen. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it's actually a fantastic opportunity to dovetail into exactly what Tim was referring to in his previous presentation. And what I wanted to do was just to give everyone a little bit of a flavour in relation to really the financing considerations that we as bankers have to look at, particularly when we look at self-storage or third-party storage or extending financing against inventories held on farm. Obviously for me as a structurer, I've been doing this for 20 years. The more access I have to a counterparty's operations, plant, farm, whether that be a farm or factory, it obviously gives me a greater opportunity to structure something which is going to be more bespoke, which is going to be more user friendly, and hopefully at the end of the day is more best bang for buck for the counterparty or for the client. So what I wanted to do was just to go through some of the aspects in relation to to what I really see as some of the hurdles, some of the considerations that we have to do as bankers, but also then look at again what Tim was saying in respect to the kind of the implementation of standards, those kind of aspects in relation to dare I say it, but adding a little bit more structure, more professionalism into the sector. I feel will provide me and my team and obviously my peers and other institutions a greater ability to include or extend the financing to as much possible outside of again what Tim was saying, outside of the normal traditional aspects, which is basically the bulk handling system, and the bulk handling system. So what I've just outlined previously to my internal colleagues, and as I say, I'm very happy to provide some of my thoughts to this workshop today. It was really about how we, as internally, how we see third-party storage. What's the process that we have to go through to have it approved? So even before we have the ability to include it within the facility, what do we have to do to have it approved within the system and go through our internal admin? And what I wanted to do was include some aspects here for the participants, just to show the kind of admin internal policy and procedures that myself and my team have to tick off to ensure that they're meeting our product approvals, and obviously at the end of the day our credit approvals. So it's an interesting aspect. I think it's going to be a changing landscape, excuse the pun, but I think it's something which we as financial institutions need to be very clear on, ensuring that we get the best ability to get the financing to meet the requirements of the customer. So as I was saying in this presentation, as I say, I'll get to the most important part, which is I think is the key considerations. But the ability to extend financing against inventory located on farm storage currently within my product suite is actually very limited. And I see that as a real challenge in relation to how we can build out greater opportunities with respect to our business. Storage due diligence processes and procedures internally within banks add a considerable amount of administrative process to the onboarding of a site. And if you're looking at, say, 10, 15, 20 sites, there is a significant amount of administrative processes that you need to go through to have one onboarded, let alone having 10 or 15 onboarded. So I think that's something which we need to really look at as a sector, as an industry, and particularly what I'd like to see as a bank to see what we can try and do about making those processes a little bit more smooth. Internal, as I'm sure everyone's aware of, but again, I'll give you a bit of insight. Internal credit departments will always look to deals that are anchored at the most reliable part of the transaction. So if you're looking at a mortgage, of course, they're going to anchor that mortgage towards the land or the building. In relation to my roles as a structurer, in relation to agri-commodities or hard commodities, we would always try to look at structuring a deal which is anchored towards that commodity. So in that essence, we need to make sure that we have access to the commodity, know where the commodity is, know how much the commodity is there, what kind of quality, and be confident that there is enough security and processes around it to ensure that in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years' time, that commodity is still there and we're able to liquidate positions and so forth. So the key concerns regarding exposure to additional on-farm storage and in going on into increasing that would be really, I think, 3: operational risk, legal risk, and structural risk. And I'll come to those in more detail in the presentation further. Those kind of key concerns and really what drives credit departments and credit decisions in relation to institutions is really landing on financing which is focused on traditional forms of security. So as I said previously, you'll see a lot more traditional aspects are security, which is land, buildings, hard assets, rather than what I build my business on previously at Rabobank and now here at CBA is really about looking at what actually the counterparty does. Whether it be a grower, they're growing a commodity. If they're a miner, they're mining a commodity. Whether it's a manufacturer, they're building or manufacturing something. So what I'd like to look at is really putting aside from kind of traditional easy aspects in relation to security, and really ensuring that we're looking at what the actual business does. And what, for me as a banker and as an ex-lawyer, that gives me the ability to kind of lift up the bonnet and really have a look at what the company does, look at trade cycles, look at cash conversion, look at accounts payable, look at accounts receivable. And then that allows me to build and structure, I think, a facility or a solution for the customer, which is much more tailor-made to their requirements. And obviously, if we're looking at the extension in relation to third party or on-farm storage, where we are able to provide value and against those inventories, it is very often provided at a much lower advance rate than something inventory that is stored within the bulk handling system. And unfortunately, that's just the way that the internal processes within a bank operate at this moment. What I wanted to do is just give you a feeling of what we do here at CBA, these are. I was very lucky at the end of last year to go on some site visits myself, and there are actually two of my own photos. Apologies for the photography, but it provided. It's a very good aspect of what we have to go there and actually, even though it's grain in a bunker or in a silo. Our internal processes from a senior management perspective require us to actually go out and knock on the door and see it's there, make sure that the process is in place, make sure there are fences and so forth. So, as I've said in my outline there, our existing supply chain mandate allows for inventories to be held in the bulk handling system and also private third-party sites. Now, this mandate covers both inventory solutions or ownership solutions, so your cash and carry and your repo products, but also financing, so your borrowing bases and the supply chain finance opportunities, which we're trying to build out here at CBA, and looking at, as I say again, receivables, payables, and how we can look at the complete supply chain, not just one aspect. These policies and procedures are there to enhance and make sure that we adhere to internal policy and procedures. Under our existing policy, the bulk handling system is excluded from inspection requirements. Now, that's probably self-explanatory, and it really is a focus on third-party storage sites, and they need to be reviewed and independently ticked off to be consistent with our comprehensive site onboarding and inspection policies. This is really the slide that I wanted to focus on, and I know I've only got a short time, but I could talk for much longer, as Pat and Dan and Tim know, but because I'm actually very interested and quite passionate about seeing what we can try and do about extending financing, and if the implementation of these standards and the kind of coming together of the industry and the sector in relation to making sure that we can meet these types of requirements, then I think some of these considerations will then be dealt with in a much better position and a much better situation than they currently are. If we go from the top, we're looking at storage logistics. Now, that's really what is the on-farm storage? How is it built? What is its structure? How is it operated, and so forth? Quality and specifications. It's really about, for me to extend financing, I need to be confident and I need to understand what kind of quality we do, what kind of specs we do, and how we control those qualities and specs. The next two are probably the biggest key concerns or key considerations for me as the structuring side or the provider of the facility, is that how do we interact with security? Now, that's security on two forms. That's security in relation to maybe a grower's overall security in relation to their financing, but also security in relation to how the bank positions itself in relation to internal considerations for lending levels and determination from a credit perspective in relation to an underlying counterparty, but also the interaction that the bank has in relation to our position and our whether we're acting as an inventory financing provider or a borrowing-based provider. How do we interact with the current security regimes, whether that be here in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, and so forth. So you've got the PPSA registration, you've got PIMSI, you've got interaction in relation to those kind of requirements, which again just add to an additional level of administration and process internally. Risks. I think we all understand the risks. I didn't want my presentation just to be all about fraud, but obviously that's the number one risk that many people raise internally within my considerations, whether that be from an op risk, from my op risk colleagues, from my legal colleagues, or my credit colleagues, is how is the bank, or how are you, Adam? They are my facilities and my structures. How are you confident that the counterparty can be trusted? The grower is not going to be short to another contract, and will just take out 10,000 tons from the storage to provide it to his neighbour, or so forth. And that's a real concern for us. It has to be. And it's about a situation of making sure that you have those kind of discussions internally within the deal team, but also with the grower, with the client, with the counterparty, just to ensure that we understand where we all are, understand our considerations, and just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what we're actually going to be looking at. But that's not just fraud, which is a risk for us. It's operational risks, and they kind of come into the next 3 or 4 points. So transportation and logistics, operational processes, systems, management systems, collateral systems. Are we running off an Excel spreadsheet? Are we running off an SAP system? How do they interact with the bank's processes and procedures from a collateral management? I have a collateral management team that are linked to my structuring team. And from that perspective, we need to understand how we can work with that. Obviously, there's structuring limitations, as I've made reference to before. And then obviously we need to look at management, and there really is about who is operating the process. Is it the grower, and how long have they been operating? How long has the on-farm storage been up? And how are they going to process that through their own internal systems, and how they're going to provide information for us? I'm getting a chase up. Other information here is really what I wanted just to outline in respect to the kind of processes and the questions that I'm asked by my internal stakeholders. So we have a site operator due diligence report that we need to complete on each operator and on each new operator, and there's also a site due diligence report. And these are just some of the questions which come out of those reports. Now, for the site due diligence, that again needs to be done on each site, and needs to be done multiple times. So we have a yearly process, a yearly schedule where we're going through and ensuring that we are checking all the sites that are currently authorised and approved for use, and then going on to onboarding new sites throughout the process. Obviously, a harvest like we've had, which is fantastic and great news, has meant that we've been looking, and we've been required to look at a number of new sites because of the great volumes that have been delivered, which is fantastic news. And again, it's a bit of a situation where I'm very happy to do that work, because it means that there is more grain volumes flowing through the system. A plug for Pat and Tim, but there's also a requirement that all sites need to be members of the GTA. And again, that just provides us comfort in relation to our interaction with the GTA, and also about adherence and policies and procedures and so forth. Tim, I think I've met my requirements. That was just a very whistle-stop tour in relation to what we do. I hope that was insightful, and very happy to answer any questions that you've got.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And having been on the other side of some inventory financing from the banks, I just understand that your processes are quite detailed and quite particular. But I also, again, having been involved in inventory finance, understand immensely the value associated with those types of products. If you're in the trade and you're holding inventory and you need finance, it's certainly it's a good option and a great opportunity, I think, for industry. If we can get these standards up to the point where institutions such as banks and insurance companies are comfortable with those standards and the assurance systems around it, it obviously does mean that it provides lots of opportunities. So thank you, Adam.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mark Lewis, who's Manager Grain Services at Reardon Grain. Mark's worked in the grain industry for 20 years in a number of roles, grain marketing and supply chain. This has included AWB, Louis Dreyfus, and for the past 8 years for Reardon Grain Services. Reardon's is an integrated storage, logistics and marketing business that's an innovator in the grain supply chain, and this year celebrates 25 years. So well done to Jim and his team. And 25 years in business, and have loaded 1 million tonnes onto bulk vessels via mobile bulk loading systems in both Geelong and Portland. So I'll hand it over to you, Mark, to talk a little bit about your practical experiences of within the supply chain.
No, thank you for the opportunity to have a chat. It will be fairly quick, given times and things like that. But look, certainly I've been asked to have a talk about storage standards and the value proposition for those for the grain and some of the alternate, supply chains in the grain industry. So I'll just have a quick overview of. Firstly, just around the supply chain fundamentals, some supply chain innovations, technology side of things, and the end consumer, and which really is ultimately what it's all about, is getting the end consumer the product that they want when they want it, and to the standards and specifications that they ordered it. So on the supply chain fundamentals side, I think it's important to firstly mention that it's not just about export, and that the domestic market is certainly a very big part of what we do as a business, but also for the grain industry as a whole. And it's growing, and it does have its same quality requirements and specifications, and the same need for getting that right that the export market does. Obviously, the domestic market is there year in, year out, regardless of what our supply side fundamentals are. And as we know in this industry, the supply side is variable and very subject to weather. So I think that was an important point to make from the outset. But storage standards are applicable, as I say, for both domestic and export businesses. I think it's critical that when we're talking about private storage operators, which we would include as farm storage operations, that they are private storage operators. It's vital to have an understanding of what they're storing and what they've grown, and then gives them the capacity to be able to meet market requirements. A couple of things around the supply chain innovation side of things. So, the market naturally is continuing to evolve towards systems that reduce the amount of handling of grain or commodities. Obviously we're in a very competitive global market now, and it's vital that as an industry we continue to work towards reducing the amount of times that a commodity gets handled through to its end destination. And that does include obviously the photo I had at the front was an example of us doing the mobile bulk loading, and that's taking grain direct from private storages to ship, and in some instances direct from header to ship, which we were doing in January and February of this year. So I guess you don't get a lot less handling in the supply chain than coming straight from the header to a bulk vessel or direct into end user. And then another work in progress, I guess, that as a business and an industry that we are starting to look at is around taking the export containers direct to farm and packing them on farm to then straight back into port. So that's something that's a work in progress with the government, and will continue to evolve, but is probably the next step really for the container trade around, again, reducing those touch points for through the supply chain. At the end of the day, as I said in my start there, you can't sell what you don't know what you've got, if that makes sense. So you need to have a good understanding of quality, and you need to have a well-managed system around how you maintain the grain and the quality that you've got on farm or in your private store to be able to interact with the market. And certainly us as a business, we will reflect back to a private storage operator, whether that be on farm or independent operator, the benefits of knowing what they're doing through the price that we're prepared to pay for that grain and for the storage and handling costs associated with that grain. A big part of that and an evolving part of that is the technology side of things, and there's has already been spoken about earlier today, the remote access to testing, knowing qualities and quantities, and preserving the known quality that you've got in an operation is critical, and links back into to the finance sector as well, talking about ensuring that they can preserve the asset that they've got something funded against, and then ultimately again back to linking into what the customer, whether that be domestic or export, end user getting what they want and what they ordered. Quick look at or chat about the end user, and we have again heard about this today, that the end user in our industry is getting more and more focused on quality and identity preservation, and ensuring that some of the sustainability aspects of grain now. So increasingly we're getting asked the question as a business as to where that grain has been sourced from. Has it been sourced in a way that's sustainable, not only environmentally but from a social and well-being point of view? So that we only see that trend continuing, and one of the industries that we're quite involved in the malt barley supply for the brewing industry is certainly a big focus for the brewing industry around sustainable supply of barley, and that is only growing, and that is really only to do with, or largely to do with, what they can then sell to their end consumer, which is the beer drinker, knowing that the beer or the whatever they're drinking has been produced in a sustainable way, and that adds value to their business. So I think increasingly we're going to see that being passed back down, where we need to be reflecting those sustainable and identity preservation standards back to the way that we store and handle grain. And really, you at the end of the day, you see the private storages definitely have a role to play in being able to tie a lot of that value back in the supply chain. Often they're smaller operations, so there's certainly niche opportunities to work with certain parcels of grain, and they also have the ability to be able to enable us to innovate a little bit around how we handle and the supply chain that we can provide back to direct to loading on vessels, or direct into consumer, or into the container, which at the end of the day, as we're sort of alluding to, we will be able to pass some of those returns and value back up the supply chain, back up the country, and into the farmers or grower's pocket, which is what it's all about. So, on that note, Tim, I don't have a lot more. I'm trying to keep it nice and succinct for you, but yeah, happy to answer questions and go from there.
We might get our panel, our speakers back up here on Zoom, and open the floor for questions from anyone. I just wanted to go back to Rob Martin. Are you online there?
Yep.
Yeah, and Rob, you know what I think what you've done is given us a really good sense or taste of the sort of technology that's there. And do you see a future where the grain assessment process is totally automated?
Yeah, the platypus module, for some reason my camera's not doing what it's supposed to do. But anyway, look, the platypus system is designed as a modular unit. If you, some of the GTA members there will have seen the initial testing that we did, and it had a cobotic arm fitted to it already, not for any particular reason other than to show that that was perfectly feasible. So from where the really difficult parts have already been done, and that's the vision part. That's the bit that's going to stop everybody or most people in their tracks. But automating the system from there is a relatively straightforward process. I say relatively, nothing's easy, but it's eminently doable. I mean, but once again, it depends on exactly what is required. If a customer came to us and said, we want a darkroom operation, we don't want any humans anywhere near it, then that's one thing. If it's just automating certain parts of it, like automatically loading or unloading, there are different levels you can go to. You don't need to go cold turkey and automate the whole thing. You can go progressively, and the system's designed to do that. You can integrate as much or as little automation as you like, going all the way to, like, as I said, a darkroom operation. Okay, thanks. And David Ironside, how does this advancement in technology, how do you see that working? And perhaps also in terms, obviously, the Australian government has to give surety to the importing country government around the process and the certification of that. So what's on your mind around these sort of things?
Yeah, look, I've been really interested by the presentations that we've seen this morning particularly around some of the technological solutions to detecting contaminants in grain, because really that's what the whole phytosanitary process is about, like detecting contaminants, understanding what they are, and then determining whether the presence of those contaminants at the rate that we find them is going to be a problem for the importing country. So I think this could be a game changer, and I guess the key thing will be for us to be able to convince the importing country NPPOs, or the National Plant Protection Organisations of those importing countries, that if we use technology, it's at least as good and can provide at least the same and hopefully better assurance about the phytosanitary status of a parcel of grain as the time-honoured sort of visual examination, visual inspection system does. And that's probably the challenge for us. You know, how do you do that? And it may be that we need to run some trials to sort of compare the sensitivity of the manual inspection process with new technology ways of finding those contaminants, so that I'm thinking about probably our most demanding trading partner in this space would be Japan. I often ask myself, if Mr. Nakamura from Japan MAF was here next to me, what would he say? And that's really the key answer. And he would probably be open to the idea of using tech as an alternative to physical inspection by a warm-blooded inspector, but he would want pretty good assurance that tech is at least as effective at detecting contaminants as the time-honoured method. And I think one of the speakers earlier, I think it was Craig from CBH, was sort of made the point, briefly just touched on the point, that that visual examination by inspectors itself can be quite variable, and we've seen that ourselves. We know that with our inspectorate, there's a variety of abilities, and that's different between individuals, but also different on different days. We even find that at different times of the day, inspectors are more effective at finding contaminants. We've seen this in trials that we ran on some horticulture inspections, that if you've got inspectors working early in the day, they're better at finding things, and as the day wears on, they get less good at finding things. So to be able to demonstrate that technology is both more consistent and at least as effective in finding contaminants and helping us understand what they are, so that we can assure importing countries that we're not sending them something they don't want. I think that's going to be really, really important and exciting as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be challenging. I mean, Jared, do you think that do we run the risk here of too much transparency, if there is such a thing, and perhaps also to David's point about giving people confidence in the process? How do you do that in terms of, I think Craig and Claude touched on calibration samples. How would we manage that as an industry, do you think?
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more with what David's saying. And certainly from an industry perspective, we have traditionally, when a new type of technologies come in, we've set the bar. So we've said, you must be this equal. So certainly we wouldn't be saying to our technology providers that you can just bring any sort of technology based on your own research, if you like. In this, we would need to evaluate that. And if we did evaluate that, as I mentioned before, we need to have those sorts of calibration samples ready from a national point of view. And it's got to be from an industry perspective, because I think all of the technology that's been introduced to date has been done a little bit piecemeal in terms of different companies have been doing the work. It's been fantastic. We wouldn't be here where we are today, but I think we've reached a stage where the industry's mature enough to be able to work together to, develop those calibration samples. I think, and as I said in my presentation, it's not just about industry saying we're comfortable meeting the phytosanitary requirements. It's got to be about the quality as well. So if we were using this technology to take away the AOs, for example, and look at those contaminants, again, we'd want to be confident that we've got that ability. But I guess that, there is a risk here, Pat, that this technology, as Rob and others have said, that it tells industry that our visual inspection process is basically crap, that, there's a lot more in there than we thought. So we can't meet zero tolerance anymore for whatever contaminant. So we have to work through those processes to see what the technology tells us, and then look at, well, how can we implement that technology based on what it's telling us?
Well, just on that, I mean, most of us are human. So the question around the difference in the sampling technology is a question for you, Rob, and also for Jared and maybe David. But which way do you approach this? Is it about developing the machines to replicate the humans, or is it about the humans standing back and letting the machines operate at a different level, knowing that at the end of the day, what we've really got to also make sure is that the importing country is satisfied, or it may even be a domestic consumer, that they're comfortable with the technology. So how do you approach that, Rob? What's in your mind about designing it, these sort of issues?
Well, I mean, I think Jared was correct. The industry's got to work with guys like us to build it. We can't tell you how that ought to work, and you can't tell us how to build a machine. So I guess it needs to be a collaborative adventure in that regard. However, I would say, I mean, look, we could dumb the machine down so that it can't see stuff that a human can't see. And in which case, as I said before, just trying to duplicate a human, all you're doing is paying for all this technology and then not using most of it. So, that would be not sensible. In my world, it might not fly in the real world, but in my world, it would be better if the whole standards were reviewed to align more with what a machine does than what a human does. But that's probably a long and possibly painful process for the industry. I'm not sure how that works out. So I think the bottom line is it's a collaborative effort in the beginning. We've got to be mindful that we can't just defect the whole of the Australian grain crop and degrade it to the bottom of the pile. That's not going to win any friends. And so it's a matter of working through that and coming up with programs and systems that interpret the result as it's required by the industry.
There's a lot of thinking. Do you have any thoughts on that, David? Or?
Oh yeah, look, I think there's certainly. I mean, look, most importing countries will say that grain to meet the standard prescribed by the importing country, you know, the grain has to will meet certain specifications. So at the moment, the way that we test whether grain meets that specifications is by visual examination. So I'm thinking that if we move to a technology solution that's more effective at finding contaminants, then that is something we'll have to deal with. But at the same time, if it's the standard is the standard, so really it's kind of like if we say, well, we didn't find any problems using visual examination, and we sent the grain, then you would be expecting to see rejections at the other end, or some sort of problem with the importing country. So I guess we do need to be really careful about how we explain what we're doing to importing countries, and I think we can say with confidence and with, to some good effect, that the technology that we're using is better at finding contaminants where they're there. But what I think we should push back very hard on is any attempt by importing countries to then raise the bar in terms of their standards, because if their standards are their standards, then that's what we've got to meet.
Yeah.
It's something I think we have to be really careful with, and I think Jared's right in pointing it out as an issue and something that we're just going to have to deal with as it comes. I think just to see whether technology is much more effective at finding contaminants than visual inspection, and then work out how do we communicate that with trading partners, and how do we deal with it from a certification perspective on our end.
Yeah,
I think the other issue there, Pat, is that we also need to consider this from a commercial trading aspect as well, because we all know that there's some markets out there, if the price drops, they'll pour over the grain trying to find something to see if they can get a discount. So we have to consider that, the market realities, I guess, in this process as well.
Yeah.
And that's probably a job for GTA.
Really? Okay. We'll take that as a, what do we do with those? You park them or something like that, don't you? Adam, getting onto the storage side and the finance side, I think we saw, there's opportunities to increase the amount of grain that can be financed, and I think increase people's cash flow through their businesses, I suppose, their working capital. But one of the questions I had in there is insurance. Yep. What requirements would you have around insurance, and then also whether you've had any conversations with the insurers as to what they require to insure grain in storage, and grain that may be held in a sort of a non-traditional BHC? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a good point, Pat. We have very extensive working relationships with our brokers. I've recently returned from Hong Kong. In Asia, we were looking at the same aspects in relation to what are our insurance obligations? How do we use insurance to ensure that our position, as I was making reference to as one of the risks, how is our security position or our understanding of the structures enhanced? So, our insurance obligations are comprehensive. So it's again a process where, in the structures that I like to build out, we want to use that grain as an example, or milk powder, or gold concentrate, or sugar. We want to use that as the security for the lending. So we want it to be self-liquidating. So we want to ensure that the insurance obligations are met, are comprehensive. Obviously, damage, fraud, loss in any way, covering transport also. So we're looking to try at all times build out a closer relationship with the brokers, and then obviously through the brokers, the underwriters, to make sure that if there are changes, there are nuances that they want in relation to transport or to a bunker versus silo or a bladder versus a tank, they're taken into account, because in some respects it's the easiest part of it. Fine, you've got insurance, fine, put it away. You can have that argument about whether insurance underwriters are there to pay in the first place. But yeah, I mean, in my experience, when I've used insurance, it's worked well, as long as you understand what your obligations are and really what you need to do to ensure that insurance is maintained. And I think for us, it's about a bit of an education process, and again, people like Mark who are experienced in this sector, there's no need to teach them how to suck eggs, but it's really more about getting people understanding about, insurance is there, but insurance is not a silver bullet. It's not going to cure everything, but it is one method in relation to allowing financial institutions to tick a box and say, okay, we get comfort because you've got that type of insurance, and then we move forward in ensuring that there's obligations and those obligations are known. Yeah.
Okay. We've got a question that's come in through the chat there to Mark. So thank you for your presentation, first of all, Mark. So I always take the compliments when you can. It was looking at the importance of growers to have good storage systems and knowledge of their product quality. Is there room for further development there in terms of voluntary on-farm storage programs, accreditation or stewardship? And I would sort of add into that, how do you see that risk and how do you go around managing that risk if it is a risk?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pat. And yeah, thanks for the question. And the compliments, as say, I don't get them every day. Appreciate it. I thought I was fairly brief and not very interesting, but there you go. So there are certainly voluntary on-farm storage accreditation systems already, and I can certainly talk for one that we have as Reardons, where you can go on and self-accreditate your storage site, and we will provide you with a grading in terms of A, B, or C, or I think it's gold, silver, bronze ranking, and that's something that any grower can log in and do that self-assessment, and that's based around. The framework is based around the GTA storage and handling agreement and arrangements, and and a series of questions around things like access, your quality testing regime on site, weigh bridges, all those sorts of things, and can actually get an accreditation done that will reflect, from our Q&A anyway, what we believe your standard is in terms of a private storage operator. There are other businesses that provide a similar service. So those things are available already in terms of that on-farm storage accreditation. And happy to come through, if anyone, just go through our website as an example and log in through that, and we can put you in touch with that from a Reardons business. It's obviously we're not the only ones who are doing it, but happy if you want to engage with us through that. In terms of the importance of it, Pat, and I guess we will audit those individual farms through. Not necessarily through Reardons, but there are some independent companies that will go out and audit those farms and just provide feedback in terms of how their storage is stacking up versus what they've self-accredited. And then really it comes down to how they perform, and you learn fairly quickly. And again, we've been in business for 25 years, so we sort of have a good understanding of who's doing what out there, and to some extent things get audited, if you like, anyway, where it doesn't take very long to work out if that particular private storage system is not, able to meet the commitments that they think that they have been able to make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Tim, there was sort of a discussion earlier actually around the storage site standards that we sort of talked about today being self-regulatory. Do you think that would it be easier if it was just regulated by the government, or do you think that there's a way for industry to manage this at its own level? And I'd probably then throw to David and sort of get his perspective on whether it's self-regulatory can work, or whether at the end of the day it needs a government big stick approach.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. That's a very good question, and it's something that obviously we've had discussions with David and some of the people on his project team as well. That we certainly see storage standards being something that really requires market demand for it to work properly. I certainly don't think the stick approach will work for something like this. There's been other projects that have been run previously around storage arrangements on farm, and they probably found it because the market didn't demand them. But I think the time now is with both the export market, the domestic market, the requirements that customers are putting on the supply chain. Certainly right now that we should introduce standards, and I think from a market perspective, the market will start demanding a surety through the supply chain, and as a result, these types of standards I think I might have mentioned earlier that you may need from a ticket to the game perspective, just to be able to show your wares to be part of some of the supply chains. Obviously, some supply chains may not demand assurance systems and may not demand people look to improve the way they store grain, the way they operate around the storage systems. I think, Mark, your example of read and grades, you discover fairly quickly through your processes who you want to work with. So I think standards and having a way to actually show people do actually apply the standards is important, and it will become a ticket to the game.
What are your thoughts, David, in terms of regulatory, self-regulatory, and how can it sort of come together around that?
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, there are outcomes that are regulatory in nature that the department is required to enforce, and those are things around when we talk about light's gone off. I'll just try and get that back on. Yeah, that's right. This is how we save energy for the government. Just turn the power off. Look, what I was saying is there are, at the end of the day, there are standards that we have to hold entities to if they want to export, and those standards go to things like how are you managing hygiene at your establishment? How are you managing pest control? Do you have a level of ability to trace the product that moves through your facility, one step forward, one step back, those kinds of things. So whether the responsibility for ensuring that happens, whether that rests solely with the department, or whether industry entities want to take the responsibility and kind of own it, is really a choice for industry. The department will continue to offer the same old regulatory position and the way we have done business for entities that don't want to or can't modernise the way they operate. That's a given. But my hope is that those entities become over time a smaller and smaller proportion of the whole population, and that more and more businesses see that it's in their own interest to own the responsibility for meeting those standards themselves. And where they do that, then the big advantage for us is that we want to be able to be in your face less. We want to be able to lighten the regulatory touch that we apply to businesses that take ownership for meeting those standards themselves. And so we may get to a point where we only come and see you once every few years. And that just makes sure that the other assurance mechanisms that you've got in place continue to meet our needs and the needs of our trading partners. But
yeah,
I'd like to think that, you know, in 10 years time, certainly even in 5 years time, we can have a fair proportion of the volume of grain that's handled around the country for export being managed in a modern, more updated way, where the department is really just an assurer of standards for overseas countries rather than coming around with a big stick wanting to hit people who aren't compliant.
Jared, just last thing then, on in terms of some of these standards, you know, the government are going to have requirements, but I would think that there's other things that, let's call it, that good operators in the industry would be doing that may not in fact be a government requirement, but it's still pretty important for the consumer's confidence in the grain. What sort of things do you think about?
Yes, definitely. And, you know, as I said, more and more the customers are wanting to know how we produce things. You know, we're getting some importing country requirements. You know, the EU through their farm to fork, they not only want to control how their growers are growing the grain, but they also want to understand how we're growing the grain, and they want more sustainable systems for all the grain that they're being supplied with. But it's not just the EU. Japan have just introduced a target for, you know, organic grain coming into the country from exporters. So it's happening more and more around the world, and we have to get in the real world, I guess, and modernise, which is what this is all about.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're probably out of time, I think, but appreciate everyone's input and presentations and the questions. And there's a couple of other questions we'll try and address later in the day. So this afternoon, we're going to look at an IT roadmap and then also talk about market access a little bit and transport and logistics. Thanks, everyone.